Welcome, everyone. Bob Madison, Senior Associate Director here with Minnesota State High School League. Welcome to this recorded edition of Lead this week regarding classification, competitive section placement. Our much anticipated MSHSL enrollments are available for you on the competitive section resource page, as well as this recording. If you've been able to find that, you should be able to find your resources that will assist you, that we'll discuss throughout the recording here today. On our agenda are things that we'll discuss today is how we got to those MSHSL enrollments, the sport and/or activity enrollment cutoffs. Please note that that will only be for our team sports as of right now. Those are the ones that we're able to appeal and need to move forward within our timeline. Also, the method for classification. You're going to want to be aware of this, how we got to where we did regarding your school or team's potential classification. Also, if you're within that 10% or over 50%, or if you're a co-op hockey team, you have the ability to appeal. We'll walk through that as well. So that's our agenda for today. Let's keep moving forward here. And again, I mentioned it earlier. Please note where you will find this information. If you click on tournaments, then go to competitive sections, you'll find a number of those resources on that page. Due to our receiving the MDE total enrollments as of last Thursday, we did have to adjust our timeline a bit. Please note again where to find this on the left-hand side. We did receive again the MSHSL or the MDE enrollments as of last Thursday. Therefore, we had to adjust a bit in terms of where we're at on that timeline. Please note that we'll do our best to continue to move forward, but our timeline is a bit off at this time as to where we had previously anticipated. Let's talk about MSHSL enrollments, how we get to that again. So what we did is we took our total enrollments from the MDE. From there, we created our MSHSL enrollments, and you can see it here, is we take 40% of your free and reduced lunch enrollment numbers, subtract that from your MDE enrollments. That gets us to the MSHSL enrollments. MSHSL enrollments is what we use for our cutoffs, amongst other things. But note that once you get into the appeal process again, we still may ask for MDE enrollments because that may be all you have access to in terms of previous years. Again, note below that example of how you get to that MSHSL enrollment versus the Department of Education or the MDE enrollment. All right, back to this page here again. One of the things you're going to want to be aware of is that method for classification. All right, this is how you end up in the class that you are. If you look at baseball, we have 4 classes. We have the top 64 at the top there in 4A. The next 64 are in 3A. Please note that those are the top 64 enrollments. If there were a tie, both of those schools would be in that top 64 enrollments. Again, then we had the next 64 for class 3A. And then what we do in baseball, but not in all sports, is class 2A and 1A. We take the remainder of those teams and divide those in half. So every sport is a little bit different. Some are more similar than others. Please be aware that all of our sports and activities are located on that method to determine classification. Become aware of that, especially for where your schools and teams are located. Enrollment cutoffs. This is for our activities again in our team sports where there are appeals that are available. Those enrollment cutoffs are that bottom line, that bottom school, if that's a 48 or a 64 or a 128. That is where the cutoff is for that classification. We call those enrollment cutoffs. Again, right now, you're only going to see them in what is defined as team sports, according to the 400 series of bylaws. Football, hockey, basketball, baseball, dance, one-act play, soccer, softball, and volleyball all have the ability to appeal in those team sports. If you do qualify, we'll talk about that later here in the presentation. Some may ask, well, why not lacrosse? Well, lacrosse is a one-class sport in this case. Therefore, there's no place to appeal down to. Otherwise, all those other team sports will be noted. Again, you see those cutoffs that were located as a resource here within this page as well. And also note that for the other sports and activities that don't have the opportunity to appeal, we'll get those out and update the page as well for those once we work through the appeals for our team sports. All right, let's talk about those cutoffs. Here's an example. Right now we have baseball, basketball, dance, and football. The other team sports are located on the page. For presentation purposes, I was not able to get all of them on here. What you'll note, again, let's use baseball as an example. That 1197 is the bottom enrollment, or the smallest school. That 64th school in baseball is actually 1197. And anything above that obviously is 4A. Again, in 3A, that 559, that's an actual school, always at an actual school. Schools between 559 and 1196 would be your 3A. And then you keep going down below for the other classes. Again, these are the cutoffs, or cut lines as we often call them, per team sport in which you have the opportunity to appeal. All of those are located as well in those resources. If you're thinking about the opportunity for appeal in those team sports, this is the 400 series of bylaws. You can find this on pages 78 through 83 in terms of how you qualify for your appeal. There's really a couple options to be able to do so. You need to exceed 50% free and reduced lunch enrollment, and or be within 10% of that cutoff. And you're going to see a table down here below that gives you an example of what that looks like. Again, if you're in a co-op, one of those schools must exceed that 50%, or your team must be within that 10%, right? So take a look at those enrollments in that table. If you have questions on that, know what range you're in. And if you're in that 10% of that cutoff, that you're able to appeal. Again, we'll get into appeals, whether or not you would like to appeal. That would be up to you, but we'll look at criteria here in a bit. Also, our executive committee has determined that if you are in a co-op for hockey, you have the ability to appeal. You don't necessarily need to be within that 10% and or that 50% free and reduced lunch enrollment. Co-ops do have the opportunity to appeal due to the uniqueness of that sport. All right, if you are choosing to appeal, please know this, that you will fill out a form. It is due on March 6th. We'll get into that timeline again. I'd say roughly 10% of those that apply, depending on the sport, will be successful in their appeal. So as you're working through this and you say, you know, we're just not that school that has a large mobile population, or do not have a lot of SLIFE students, or we have a low free and reduced lunch, or we've had a lot of success in wins and losses, the appeal is probably not for you. So that appeal will ask you to fill out information. And as you prepare for that, you're going to want to have your free and reduced lunch enrollment and that percentage of your student body again. Students with limited interrupted formal education, known as SLIFE. What percentage of your students are SLIFE students? The higher percentage of SLIFE students, the more points you get, the more opportunity for success within your appeal. What is your total enrollment in grades from 9 through 12? This is something we would compare with the other schools in that sport or activity as they're looking to appeal. We're looking for regular season records. Again, and if you're in basketball and you have that 20-6 record in the current class that you're in, or the class that you're looking to appeal for, odds are you're not going to be successful in that appeal. But if you have had limited success, very few wins in the regular season and or the postseason, your opportunities for success within an appeal would be better than others. If you have made it to a state tournament in the last 5 years, again, you're going to get less points. The longer you play in postseason play, the less opportunity to be successful on your appeal. You will score lower in that rubric. And then total participation in grades 9 through 12 in that sport or activity. We'll have you list that by the year. Start to prepare what those numbers were like for your last 5 years. You're going to need to enter that into your application for appeal. We'll score that through the rubric. And then any additional information that you might have. If you have a large number of students that move in or out of your district, if you do simply have housing within your district, therefore it's difficult for people to come into your district and find housing. If you have a large magnet program, we hear of arts programs or special education programs, or others that, again, are magnets where maybe those students don't necessarily participate. This would be an area to capture more points again in your appeal to drop down one classification. Again, appeals, that information will need to be completed by March 6th. You'll enter that into a form. That form will calculate a score for you. And also note that a portion of our AD's advisory will come back in and we'll score that for you and actually create a cutoff within those appeals. But again, prepare for that. You'll need that by March 6th. All right, I'm going to back up here if I can. One other thing I wanted to share with you, if we go back to our method to determine classification. If you're in that top 64, please note that that would be with schools that have already opted up, right? So if you're trying to figure out which schools are in there based on their enrollment, which many will do, that top 64 or another class could be another class of 48 or 128, whatever that number may be. That number will also include opt-ups. You may not know those opt-ups as of right now. Those will become more apparent as the process moves on, but just be aware of that. Opt-ups are included in those numbers as well. Other than that, hopefully you have found this recording to be helpful, and you'll get more information from us. Utilize, get to know the information that is here. Thank you for listening to this lead recording on classification and competitive section placement. We'll be with you with more information as we work through that timeline. Thank you again.